Morning. You remember when you were 4 years old? Kind of hard for me. Been a while. Seems like it gets longer ago every year. Isn't that the way that works? But when you were 4 years old, what was the number one goal in your life? To be 5. You were 4, and then you were 4 1/4, and then you were 4 1/2, and then you were almost 5, and then you were 5 years old. And boy, the day before your 5-year-old birthday, let somebody call you 4, and you were going to make sure they knew. You're almost 5, right? When you were 11, what was the number one goal in your life? Yeah, be a teenager. Once you became a teenager, you had freedom, right? You're going to have all of this freedom. Then you became 13, and your goal was to get your driver's license. Because when I get my driver's license, I'm free. And then, when you became 16 and got your driver's license, your goal was, I can't wait till I get out of the house. Go to college. In fact, we wanted to grow up so fast, be our own boss, do what we wanted to do when we wanted to do it. Nobody telling us what to do, nobody to answer to. Life was going to be great. We couldn't wait. And then we grew up. And we found out there's still people who tell us what to do, right? And we found out that most of the time we don't get to do what we want to do. We do what we have to do. And most of the time that freedom that we saw in the future is much more restrictive than the freedom we had as a child. We've even come up with a great term for this. We call it adulting. You've seen the little coffee mugs or t-shirts, I don't want to adult today. You know, I don't want to have the responsibilities. I don't want to have the worries. I don't want to be the one in charge anymore. I don't want to adult today. How many of you think that it might be fun for a week to be able to go back and live life like you did when you were 5 years old? Yeah? Just let somebody else take all the worry, somebody else take all the concern, somebody else take all the responsibility. You just get to, wait a minute, be free? Now, when you were 5, you didn't think it was freedom. You thought it was restriction. But from our perspective of today, not worrying about all the adult stuff sounds like what? Freedom, doesn't it? It's free. I get to be free. Isn't it amazing how our perspective shifts and changes? And how sometimes the very things that we thought were one way are another way. In Galatians 4, when we saw the passage up on the screen, Paul's talking kind of about that shift in perspective. But the shift in perspective is not just a change of our attitude, it's a change of our circumstances. Our circumstances have shifted, and so it makes one thing look like something else. Actually, it makes one thing become something else. Now, what Paul's going to do is he's going to compare being a slave to being a child. You know, when you're a child, you pretty much do what somebody else tells you to do. When you're 4 or 5, your mom or your dad picks out your clothes. If you were like me, there was a point at which you threw a fit about what they wanted you to wear because you didn't like it. And guess who won? They did. Or at least that's how it was in my house. And I know my mom never said, oh, you don't like broccoli? Well, I'll run to McDonald's and get you a Happy Meal. My mom never said that. My mom said, you don't like broccoli? Well, you can go to bed hungry. All right? Because she won. And so it seemed like I was a slave because of the circumstances. Well, Paul's beginning to compare, and he says, okay, you have slaves over here on one side. They're controlled by a master. They're controlled by somebody who tells them what to do, tells them what they can and can't be, tells them what they can and can't have. You have a child over here. They're controlled by parents or guardians who tell them what they can do, where they can go, what they can have. The two seem awful lot alike, don't they? But there's a fundamental difference between a child and a slave. And that fundamental difference lies in the future expectation of the person. You see, a slave, what does a slave have to look forward to? More slavery. Oh, but when my master dies, well, what happens? I get a new master. I get passed on to somebody else, probably one of the kids. Maybe they're better, maybe they're worse, I don't know. But the expectation of a slave is that they are always going to be what? A slave. There's really no future hope. But what's the future expectation of a child? Well, they're going to grow up, aren't they? They're going to one day inherit everything their parents own. One day they're going to be the master of everything that their parents have. And so the child, while in a state of obedience, is in a state of obedience towards a goal of a future, a goal of hope. A slave, while in the state of obedience, is in a state of obedience with zero hope, with no goal, with no future ahead. And it is in this change of perspective, because of our change, that we find the way we are supposed to live. And it's a profound change. Because you see, each one of us in here has been the slave to another master. There was a master who controlled your life. He would never willingly let you go. Now, he didn't do it for your own good. He didn't do it for your own benefit. He controlled you for his purposes, for his uses, so that he might be able to do what he wanted to do. And that master decided that when he finally used you all up, and there was nothing left of you, then he would sentence you along with him to eternal destruction. And he would make sure that even in death, you didn't get to escape. And every one of us in here was a slave to this master. But then God comes along. And God saw us in slavery to another, and he decided that he wanted us. And Paul would say in Galatians that when the time was just right, God sent his Son to buy us back. He sent his Son to come in and say, look, you're not going to be a slave anymore. I'm going to set you free. But he didn't just set us free and leave us kind of helpless, did he? No, he set us free, and then Paul will say he did something else. He adopted us. He adopted us, and he made us his child. That's pretty amazing. It's a pretty big deal to adopt somebody, isn't it? I mean, when you're looking out and you're looking at somebody out there and you're trying to decide, well, do I adopt this person or do I not adopt this person? You know, I gotta decide how this person fits in my family. I got to decide, is this person going to be a benefit to my family? You know, how much do I love this person? How much do I want? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, right? I've got a really good friend of mine who lives in Little Rock. And he and his wife have adopted 6 children. 6. And every single one of them is a special needs child. That's love. That's wanting to be there for somebody. Most of us would look at that situation and say, oh, I can't do that, right? It would be a challenge to adopt somebody who requires that much financial commitment, that much emotional commitment, that much physical commitment, that much time. How could we do it with 1, let alone 6? And yet our God says, I will adopt every special needs person that comes my way. I don't care what your backstory is, don't care what's happened, I am going to adopt you. Now I want you to imagine today that Bill Gates walks in here. You know, Microsoft Bill Gates, worth $1 billion. And he walks right up to you and he says, hey, I want to adopt you. Oh, I see some smiles. And so you go, Nah, thanks. I'm fine. I'll go, work and do whatever I got to do. Maybe I'll earn enough money one day to have, $1,000. But look, I'm promising you all this money. I'll adopt you. You'll become my heir. And when I die, you'll inherit my $1,000,000,000. It'll be all yours. You can do whatever you want to with it. There's many of us who might, if your parents are here in this audience, you might turn to them and say, it's been nice knowing you. I'm going to go with Bill for a while. Don't worry, I'll take care of you when I get my $1,000,000,000. It'll be all right. I'll still love you, but, we might decide that it's worth that. And we might not. But if somebody turned Bill Gates down when he said he wanted to adopt us, what would we say? We're crazy. Look at the inheritance you're going to get. What would we say to somebody when the God of the universe says, I want to adopt you? I want you to be my child, and let me tell you about the inheritance I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you an eternity where you never worry, you never cry, you never fear, you're never in pain. You're going to have eternity where all you do is stand around with people just like you and praise me. And you're going to feel nothing but joy for the rest of your existence, which lasts forever. And then somebody goes, nah, sounds good, but I think I'll pass. And we want to go, why? Why would you do that? It gets even better. Paul will say in this chapter, he starts off by saying, we were slaves, and then we came to know God, and then he puts a little parentheses in there, and he goes, well, really, we came to be known by God. Now, as people, we're pretty good at hiding stuff, right? I mean, there's very few people who know everything we've ever done. And we like to keep it that way. But even if you've opened up enough to do like some have and give your testimony about just about everything you've ever done, there's even fewer who know everything you've ever thought. There's even fewer who've known everything you've ever wanted to do. Don't lie to me. There's somebody you've wanted to murder at some time in your life. Now, you may not have done it, but there was in your mind this thought of, here's how it could happen, and I might get away with it. We think things sometimes that are just not things we want to confess to anybody that we've thought of. And yet, this passage says we have been fully known by God. God doesn't just know the parts we want Him to know. When He's looking at adopting us, it's not that He just knows the part we show to everybody. He knows the words that we've thought and not said. He knows the lusts that we've had, the desires that we've had, the twisted thoughts we've had that we have never shared with anybody else. God already knows those. And guess what? He still wants to adopt us. Knowing everything about us, He still wants to adopt us. We're always afraid that people won't love us if they know everything. I mean, we spend our life in fear of that. You start dating, you sure aren't going to tell everything, right? Yeah. You get married in the honeymoon period. Now a few years wear off and you let more and more people know more and more stuff. But you still hide some because there's this fear in us. We have this fear of not being loved. We have a terror of not being loved. And we are afraid in our heart of hearts that if people really know who we are, they just might decide not to love us. The blessing of God is He adopted us already knowing all of that. There is nothing for Him to find out. And knowing all of that, He says, I love you enough, I want you to be my child. And to prove it, I bought you back with my Son. We've been known by Him so thoroughly that He knows every imagination of our heart. He knows everything. Nothing is hidden. And yet He still adopted us. while most people would have left us in our slavery. Honestly, I will tell you, a lot of you know my story. There are a whole lot of churches, probably the majority of them, they wouldn't want me standing up here speaking in front of them. They know my story, and they would find me completely unredeemable, unworthy. They sure wouldn't want to listen to some lesson from me. I mean, you know what that guy's done? You know where that guy's been? He doesn't have any right to stand up there and talk. He doesn't have any right to stand up there and preach. They would want to leave me in my slavery. My slavery to my past, my slavery to the master who took me down the wrong road time and time again. They would want to leave me there. And they would look at me and they would not see somebody who has been redeemed. They would see somebody who is still a slave. And they would say, that person is never going to be anything because of what they've done. And I thank God every day that I am not dependent. That I have been adopted by a Father who loves me, knowing everything I've done, who loves me. And who still allows me to be used. Not because of my greatness, but in spite of my weakness. He adopted me because He wants me. I don't know why He wants me. The unfathomable mystery to me is, why does God want any of us? He doesn't need us. He's going to be God whether we follow Him or not. He's got the entire universe at His command. He's got everything He ever wanted. I don't understand why He would want somebody like me. I can't comprehend why He would love somebody like me, let alone why He would want to make me His child. And yet He assures us He doesn't. Now you might say, boy, this just sounds too good to be true. Who wouldn't sign up for this? Well, the problem is, our master of the past is not a good loser. Satan is not a good loser. And so when we decide to God, you want me, you got me, adopt me, take me, I'm yours. And we lift our hands and we say, I'm yours, God. I'm all in. Take me. Satan goes, it's not going to be that easy. I'm going to try to get you back. Because I'd rather have you as a slave than as God's child. And he begins to try to do all of these things to convince us that the good news of God is not really as good as it sounds. That we're just trading slavery to Him to slavery to God. And slavery to God is no fun. But hey, Satan says slavery to me is a lot of fun. Look at everything you get to do if you're working for me. And look at all the stuff you don't get to do if you're working for God. And if we're not careful, over the course of time, we sell ourselves back into slavery. And that's what the Galatians were doing in this chapter. They were selling themselves back into slavery of having to keep rules and regulations that Jesus got rid of. They were selling themselves back into the slavery of believing they controlled their own life. Back into the slavery of believing that they made themselves righteous and God didn't make themselves righteous. They were selling themselves back into the slavery of believing they could be good enough to earn being God's child, rather than trusting that Jesus bought them as God's child. And Paul says to them, why would you want to go back into slavery? When you have become a child of God and He has freed you, why would you want to go back? It's almost unimaginable. People were coming along and trying to convince them to go back and to relapse. You ever had anybody in your life who tried to convince you to be the way you used to be? Or anybody who, maybe they didn't just outwardly try, all they did was doubt that you really had changed. Oh, I know what you say, but I'm just waiting. You'll come back. You can't succeed. You're going to fail. I mean, we set ourselves up for that. We have all these goals that we have in our mind of how we're going to stop doing this. We're going to quit doing that. We're going to quit doing the other. And we say, we start out on a Monday morning with great ideas, don't we? great intentions. And then by Wednesday, we're all discouraged like, man, look at this. It's because Satan's there going, oh, it's not really that big a deal. You really don't understand. Well, it is a big deal. We have been adopted. We belong to somebody else. And instead of obeying Satan, we obey God. Are we still to be obedient? Yes. Does it still look like somebody else is telling us what to do? Yes. But the difference is, over here is slavery that leads to death. Over here is obedience and adoption that leads to eternal life. Which one do you want to obey? It is unimaginable to us, when we really think about it, that somebody would want to trade this or trade salvation for destruction. That somebody would want to trade adoption for slavery. That somebody would want to trade heaven for hell. It's unimaginable. And yet it's a thing that we struggle with every single day. Will we trade heaven for hell? Paul can't believe, why would they give up this? $1.6 billion, mega millions. Somebody in South Carolina won it. $1.6 billion. Obviously, I didn't win. But it was fun sitting around imagining how you would spend $1.6 billion. Actually, the government would get half of it, so you'd have to struggle along on, $850 million. And you sit around and start thinking about, how would I spend $850 million? And I just decided I'd be the most generous person in the world. I'd give money here, and 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 I'd give money here. You want money, you want money, you want money. Everybody got money, 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 money. I was going to be generous. Obviously, it doesn't matter because it didn't have a ticket, so it can't win. But imagine winning $1.6 billion on the Mega Millions lottery. You got the ticket in your hand, and you go, man, $850 million free and clear sounds pretty good, but throw it in the trash. What would we call that? Would we call that insanity? Would we want to beat the person to a pulp for being dumb? Yes, we would. We would just say, what are you thinking? Do you know how free your life could be? Do you know how wonderful your life could be with all of that money? Honestly, your life would probably be miserable for a whole different reason. But just imagine how wonderful it would be. And we would look at him and we'd go, I cannot believe you would do this. And yet every day, every week, Satan is whispering to us, tear up your ticket. Jesus Christ has given you a ticket to adoption as a son. He's given you a ticket to an inheritance in heaven. He's given you the ticket that lets you win everything. And Satan is whispering, oh, I know it sounds good, but just tear it up. And boy, there are weeks when I've had to go back to God and go, God, would you take me back? Because what I've done is I've taken that ticket that says heaven and I've ripped it to shreds and I've thrown it in the trash can. And yet, we have such a loving God that even when we throw away the gift that He gives us, He remains ready to adopt us again. I remember my kids said those words, and I know I said them, and I know my mom and dad, and my dad probably didn't, he's too good, but I know some people said them. I hate you. Did you ever tell your parents, I hate you? You ever had your child say, I hate you? And immediately when they said that, you quit loving them, right? You said, I'm done. It's over. You hate me. Okay, you're out. Go live on your own. Go take care of yourself. You're going to sass me? I tell you what, you're gone. You can just go take care of yourself. I'm done. We don't say that, do we? When our kid hollers and screams, I hate you, we know they really do what? They love us. Now they're mad about some petty little thing They're mad about something that's going on that they don't like. They can't control their own way. They're having to mind us usually when they say it. And we're petulant little kids like that. Because we'll say, I hate you, God, by tearing up what He's given us and throwing it in the trash can. And yet, He doesn't stop loving us. He sits there and He wants our adoption. He wants us to be His children more than anything else. God has chosen us. He has known us. He has redeemed us. He has adopted us. He has given us the inheritance of heaven. And yet so often we're tempted to return to that master who controls us, who uses us up till there's no more of us left, who destroys us here on earth and then can't wait to destroy us for eternity. And we give up the glory of being the child of God, the promise of heaven, for the despair of being the child of Satan and the promise of nothing but misery. And it's a choice that we deal with. The decision is ours, and it's ours every day. Every day we live, we can say, I want to continue to be a child of God. Or I want to sacrifice everything that God's given me to go back over here and be a slave to Satan. Paul would say, to be a slave to Satan is to be very, very, very misinformed. Because Satan will never give you anything. If you've never been God's child, you know what? He stands ready to adopt you right now. Not because of you or what you've done, but because of Him and who He is. Right now, He's ready. If you are God's child, but you find yourself trapped in something that's pulling you away from Him and towards Satan, He says, come home. Come home and let me set you free. You're my child. I want you to be free. I want you to be ready for the inheritance. If you are God's child or have been, and you've wandered so far away you can't remember what it's like, don't worry. He remembers for you. He knows who you are, and He says, if you come back, I'll make it just like you never left. In fact, I'll make it even better than when you left. If you are tired of being a slave to somebody who does nothing but use you up, who commands you to do things that are not in your best interest and take you places that you should never go, if you want to be the child of the Almighty God who's the master of the universe, all you've got to do is say yes. Everything else He has already done. When He died on that cross, your sins were already there. Before you were born, the price of your being a child of God was already paid. Before you even existed, He did everything so that at the moment you were ready, He could adopt you. If today is that moment, if now is that moment, why don't you come? Why don't you find out what it's like to be a child with a hope of an inheritance rather than a slave with the despair of destruction? He calls you today while we stand and sing.